Everyone who mattered in the old money criminal circles of New York knew one truth. Rocco Moretti never needed to raise his voice. His power didn't come from shouting or theatrics. It came from the silence that followed his name. Deals closed faster. Arguments ended sooner. People stood straighter when he entered a room, not because he demanded it, but because experience had taught them to. That was why, when Rocco decided to make an example of a quiet waitress named Elena Rossi, no one intervened. And that was his mistake. Rocco believed he was correcting a lapse in respect. He believed he was reminding the room who owned it. He believed he was dealing with someone small. What he didn't see were the details that mattered. The way Elena never rushed, even when pressured. The way her hands were steady, not nervous. The way she listened more than she spoke. The way her eyes stayed calm when they should have been afraid. Elena wasn't scared of Rocco Moretti. She was scared of what would happen if she stopped pretending to be. The restaurant itself was a monument to restraint and menace. Heavy wood paneling. Soft amber lighting. Crystal glasses clinking quietly beneath conversations that never quite rose above a murmur. This was not a place where violence exploded. It was where violence waited. Elena had worked there for just under a month. Long enough to learn the rules. Long enough to understand which tables to avoid eye contact with. Long enough to perfect the art of being forgettable. She wore her uniform loose. She kept her shoulders slightly rounded. She moved with deliberate care, as if afraid of breaking something or someone. The staff thought she was shy. The guests thought she was harmless. That was exactly the point. When a minor mistake put her directly in Rocco's line of sight, the temperature in the room changed instantly. Conversations faded. Chairs stopped moving. Everyone understood what was happening before a word was spoken. Rocco watched her the way a man watches a problem he intends to solve, not with anger but with cold curiosity. He expected tears. Apologies. The familiar collapse of confidence that always came when someone realized they had crossed him. But Elena didn't crumble. She apologized, yes. Her voice was polite, controlled. But something in her posture stayed grounded, balanced, as if she were bracing, not to flee but to endure. Rocco noticed. People rarely failed him twice in the same moment. Yet here she was, standing in front of him, composed in a way that didn't fit the role she was playing. That discrepancy irritated him more than the mistake itself. So he pushed. Not to hurt her. Not yet. But to see what would happen. What followed wasn't the public humiliation Rocco expected. It wasn't the quick submission everyone else anticipated. It was the first crack in the illusion he'd built around himself. And the beginning of a lesson he never thought he'd have to learn. Because power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly, until it's forced into the open. And when Elena Rossi was finally forced to stop pretending, the room would never belong to Rocco Moretti again. Rocco Moretti never announced his authority. He didn't need to. It arrived ahead of him, settling into rooms like a pressure change no one could quite explain but everyone could feel. At the far end of the restaurant, beneath a chandelier older than most of the men who feared him, Rocco sat with his back straight and his movements economical. He spoke rarely. When he did, the table leaned in. Not out of respect but instinct. Silence bent toward him the way iron bends toward a magnet. This was his domain. Not officially, of course. On paper, the restaurant belonged to a holding company registered under a forgettable name. But paper meant nothing here. Rocco decided which suppliers were paid on time, which permits sailed through inspection, which problems vanished quietly before they became public. The walls remembered him. The staff understood without being told. He wore a tailored dark suit, nothing flashy. Power didn't need decoration. His watch was understated. His shoes perfectly polished but unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Rocco believed excess was a sign of insecurity. Real authority was invisible until it wasn't. Around him men spoke carefully. Not softly, carefully. Each word weighed, each joke measured. Laughter never came too loud, never lingered too long. Rocco didn't correct people. He observed them. He noticed who spoke over others, who interrupted, who rushed to fill silence. Those habits told him more than confessions ever could. He was reviewing documents when the murmur of the room shifted. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to register. Rocco looked up, eyes scanning without moving his head. The staff were adjusting their paths, stepping wider around one of the tables near the service corridor. A small disruption quickly contained. Rocco returned to his papers. He had built his reputation the same way he built his empire. Quietly, methodically, without unnecessary force. Violence was expensive. Drew attention. Fear, when cultivated correctly, did the work for you. People obeyed because they wanted to avoid becoming examples. And Rocco Moretti had made examples of enough men to last a lifetime. A banker who thought he could delay a payment. A contractor who tried to renegotiate after the ink dried. A former associate who mistook familiarity for safety. Each had learned the same lesson. Rocco never needed to shout. He never threatened. He simply removed options. That was why he didn't notice Elena Rossi at first. She moved through the room the way furniture did. Present, useful, unseen. Her posture was modest. Her eyes stayed down. She carried herself like someone accustomed to being corrected, not listened to. To Rocco, she was part of the background noise of service and motion, as interchangeable as the plates she carried. But when she approached his table, something felt off. Not wrong. Not dangerous. Just inconsistent. She placed a glass down with care that bordered on deliberate. Not nervous care. Controlled care. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breathing didn't hitch. She didn't rush away the way most staff did when they reached his table. Rocco glanced up, just long enough to register her face. Ordinary. Brown hair pulled back neatly. No makeup beyond what professionalism demanded. A calm expression that didn't quite match the environment she worked in. Most people near him radiated tension without realizing it. Their bodies betrayed them. Tight shoulders, shallow breaths, restless hands. Elena stood differently. Grounded. Balanced. As if she knew exactly where she was in the room at all times. Rocco returned his attention to the document in front of him, but a note of irritation had slipped in where none had existed before. He disliked inconsistencies. They suggested variables he hadn't accounted for. One of his companions made a comment. Something unimportant said too loudly. Rocco didn't respond. He didn't have to. The man caught himself mid-sentence and fell silent, flushing slightly. The table adjusted. It always did. That was the shape of Rocco's power. Invisible, absolute. Across the room, Elena paused briefly near the service station, her back to him. She adjusted her grip on the tray, rolled her shoulders once, subtly, as if easing tension that wasn't there. Then she moved again, blending back into the flow of the restaurant. Rocco watched her for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. He didn't know why. He only knew that something about the way she occupied space refused to align with the role she was meant to play. And in Rocco Moretti's world, anything that didn't fit eventually had to be corrected. He turned back to his work, already dismissing the thought. Whatever she was, she worked for him now. And everything that existed under his roof eventually revealed its true nature, one way or another. Elena Rossi had learned long ago that being seen was dangerous. In places like this, visibility invited questions. Questions led to attention. Attention led to memory. And memory was the one thing she could not afford. So she made herself forgettable. She moved when she was needed and vanished when she wasn't. She timed her steps to the rhythm of the room, slipping between conversations and chairs as if she were part of the building itself. When someone spoke to her, she listened closely, answered briefly, and left before the exchange could linger. Her voice stayed soft, neutral, easy to ignore. It wasn't fear that kept her quiet. It was discipline. Elena had spent years learning how to control her body, to command it under stress, to move with precision even when chaos pressed in from every side. Here she used that same training for the opposite purpose. She slowed herself down, rounded her shoulders, let tension show where none existed. She let her hands hesitate just enough to suggest uncertainty, never enough to cause a real mistake. The uniform helped. 2 sizes too large intentionally. Fabric draped loosely over muscle she no longer allowed herself to acknowledge. She tied her apron in a way that softened her silhouette, hid the strength in her waist and back. Even her shoes were wrong, cheap, flat, forcing a slightly awkward gait that disguised the natural balance she carried in her bones. Most people saw what they expected to see. A waitress in a Mafia restaurant was background noise. Useful, replaceable, beneath notice. Elena counted her shifts not by days, but by incidents avoided. No raised voices directed at her. No prolonged stares. No hands lingering too long. Each quiet night was a small victory. Each unnoticed hour was proof that the system still worked. She kept her eyes down but never unfocused. She tracked reflections in glass, movement in peripheral vision. She always knew who stood behind her, who was approaching, who had shifted positions without reason. Old habits, impossible to fully unlearn. When tension rippled through the room, she felt it before she heard it. The subtle tightening of conversations. The way laughter thinned. The instinctive recalibration of space around one table at the far end. Rocco Moretti's table. Elena avoided it whenever she could. Not because she feared him, but because proximity increased risk. Men like Rocco noticed patterns even when they didn't know they were doing it. They noticed who moved differently, who reacted too slowly, who reacted too fast. Still, avoidance wasn't always possible. She approached his table with measured steps. Her focus narrowed to the mechanics of the task. Place the glass. Back. Keep her posture small. Leave no impression behind. For a moment she felt his gaze. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't hostile. It was worse than both. Curious. Elena resisted the instinct to adjust, to correct herself. Overcompensation drew attention. Instead, she let her breathing stay even. In through the nose, out through the mouth. A rhythm she had relied on in places far darker than this. She finished her task and moved away. Only when she reached the service corridor did she allow herself a single, controlled exhale. She had survived that one. In the kitchen, the noise was louder, safer. Clattering plates, muted arguments, the illusion of normal work. Elena rinsed her hands, noting the faint calluses along her fingers. Thickened skin she never fully managed to soften, no matter how long she stayed away from what had shaped them. She kept them hidden most of the time. Tonight she'd been careless. Or unlucky. Table 12 wants another bottle, the floor manager said, already turning away. Elena nodded and reached for the wine without comment. As she lifted the bottle, she adjusted her grip automatically, testing the weight, the balance. Her hands remembered things her mind refused to dwell on. Grip, angle, control. She corrected herself, loosening slightly, letting a hint of clumsiness return. By the time she stepped back into the dining room, the mask was firmly in place. She didn't see Rocco watching her then. Not directly. But she felt the shift again, that faint, unsettling sense of being measured. Elena reminded herself that people like him only noticed threats and assets. And she was neither. She was a temporary fixture. Passing presence. That belief was the foundation of her new life. Still, as she moved toward the table, weaving smoothly between chairs and low conversation, a familiar tension coiled quietly in her chest. Not fear. Readiness. A warning she had learned never to ignore. The problem with being invisible was that it worked, until it didn't. The mistake itself was small. Almost insignificant. That was what made it dangerous. Elena approached the table with the same measured calm she always carried, the bottle cradled carefully against her palm. Conversation flowed around Rocco Moretti in low, respectful tones. Men leaned in when they spoke, leaned back when they finished. The air was balanced on his presence. "Wine," someone said without looking at her. Elena nodded and set the glass down first, exactly where it belonged. She reached for the cork, fingers steady, movements precise. Too precise perhaps, but no one noticed. Not yet. A hand shot out suddenly and closed around her wrist. The contact was firm, possessive. Not violent. Not playful. It was the kind of touch meant to remind someone of their place. Elena's body reacted before her mind could intervene. Muscles tightened. Weight shifted. Her balance corrected instinctively. Heels grounding her in place. She stopped herself a fraction too late. "Relax," a voice laughed. One of the men at the table. Smiling, flushed, bored. "Didn't mean to scare you." Elena let her shoulders slump. Let her breath catch just enough. She looked down at the tablecloth. Exactly as expected. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice soft, deferential. "I didn't realize." "Careful," the man interrupted, tightening his grip slightly. "Wouldn't want you spilling that." Rocco didn't look up. He didn't have to. Table waited. Elena adjusted her hold on the bottle, deliberately loosening her grip to sell the illusion. The movement shifted the angle just enough. Red wine sloshed over the rim. It didn't pour. It didn't shatter. It spilled, slow, dark, unmistakable, across the crisp white fabric of Rocco Moretti's shirt. The room went silent. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Sound simply withdrew, as if it had been politely asked to leave. Chairs stopped moving. Forks froze midair. Somewhere near the bar, a glass chimed softly as it was set down too carefully. The man holding Elena's wrist let go as if burned. Elena felt the stillness settle around her like a held breath. She didn't look up. She didn't rush to clean it. Both would have been wrong. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, her voice trembling now, not from fear but from precision. She reached for a napkin with her free hand. Before she could touch him, another hand intercepted hers. Firm. Unyielding. Elena's fingers were pinned lightly, painfully, between two larger ones. "Don't," a voice warned from beside her. Rocco stood. He was taller than she'd realized. Not imposing in the way men tried to be, but in the way space simply rearranged itself around him. He looked down at the spreading stain, adjusted his cuff once, and then raised his eyes to her face. For the first time Elena met his gaze. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't surprised. It was empty in a way that made her stomach tighten, like a door closing without a sound. "Do you know what that shirt cost?" he asked calmly. Elena swallowed. "No, sir." He nodded, as if confirming something for himself. "More than you make in a year." A few people shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. Elena nodded again, head bowed. "I'll replace it. I'll work it off." Rocco smiled faintly. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Precisely. "You don't earn enough to work anything off." He stepped closer. Not into her space. Into her balance. Testing. Measuring. Most people shrank when he did that. Elena didn't. She stayed still. Too still. Rocco noticed. His gaze dropped briefly to her hands. To the way her fingers curled, relaxed, ready without appearing so. To the way her breathing slowed instead of quickening. "That's interesting," he said quietly. Elena forced herself to tremble. Just enough. She shifted her weight deliberately, clumsily, breaking the line of balance she'd held without thinking. "I didn't mean to," she began. Rocco lifted a hand. The gesture wasn't threatening. It was casual, dismissive. A backhand meant to humiliate, not harm. It should have landed. Instead, Elena's head moved an inch to the side. A minimal adjustment. Almost nothing at all. His hand cut through empty air. For half a second, no one understood what had happened. Rocco looked at his own hand, then back at her. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. I flinched," she said quickly, dropping her gaze, folding inward. "I'm sorry." Rocco didn't answer. The curiosity in his eyes sharpened, stripping away the last trace of indifference. "A waitress doesn't move like that," he said softly. He gestured once, sharply. Clear the room. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Chairs scraped back immediately. Conversations broke apart. The restaurant emptied with practiced efficiency, leaving behind only silence and the faint scent of wine and restraint. Rocco removed his jacket and placed it neatly on the chair. Elena understood then that the incident wasn't over. It had only just begun. Silence settled heavily once the last door closed. Rocco didn't rush. He never did. He stood there for a moment, as if listening to something only he could hear, then reached for a napkin and dabbed at the stain on his shirt. The motion was unhurried, almost thoughtful. When he was finished, he let the napkin fall to the floor. Elena watched it land. Small, deliberate act. Message. You embarrassed me, Rocco said, not unkindly. His voice carried easily in the empty room. Do you know how rare that is? I'm sorry, Elena replied. She kept her eyes lowered, her shoulders slightly curved inward. The shape of apology. The posture of someone waiting to be corrected. Rocco circled her slowly. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to be felt. His presence pressed against her senses, forcing awareness without contact. He was studying her the way one studies a flaw in an otherwise perfect surface. People make mistakes, he continued. I understand that. What matters is how they respond to them. He stopped in front of her again. You responded too calmly. Elena forced a shallow breath. I didn't want to make it worse. Most people would already be crying, Rocco said. Apologizing louder. Explaining themselves. Begging. He tilted his head slightly. You didn't. I didn't think that would help, she said. Rocco smiled faintly. It wouldn't. He reached out and lifted her chin with 2 fingers. Not roughly. Precisely. Enough to force her to look at him. Her eyes met his again. Clear. Steady. Fraction too steady. Rocco's smile faded. You're very good at standing still, he said. Do you practice? Elena felt the old instinct surge. Deny, deflect, disappear. She softened her gaze, let uncertainty blur it. I just don't like making trouble. Rocco released her chin and stepped back, as if satisfied. Neither do I. He turned his attention briefly to the table, straightening a glass, aligning a folder. Order restored. Then he looked back at her. You owe me, he said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Debt was a language Rocco spoke fluently. I'll work extra shifts, Elena said quickly. Whatever you want. Rocco laughed softly. You don't earn enough to matter in hours. He moved closer again, invading her space this time. She could smell his cologne, clean, expensive, controlled. He leaned down slightly, lowering his voice. This isn't about the shirt, he said. It's about reminding everyone, including you, where you stand. Elena nodded. I understand. Rocco studied her for a long moment, as if waiting for something to surface. Fear. Defiance. Anger. He found none of it. Only restraint. That annoyed him. Look at me, he said. She did. People like you survive by knowing when to bend, he continued. Tonight you bent late. He gestured toward the back of the restaurant, where a heavy door sat half-concealed behind velvet drapery. There's a room downstairs, he said casually. A place we settle misunderstandings. Elena's chest tightened. She kept her face neutral. I didn't mean any disrespect. I know, Rocco replied. That's what makes this interesting. He leaned back against the table, crossing his arms. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to follow me. You're going to do exactly as you're told. And when we're finished, this little incident will be forgotten. And if I don't? Elena asked quietly. Rocco's eyes flicked to the door, then back to her. Then people will remember you, he said. For all the wrong reasons. The threat wasn't explicit. It didn't need to be. Elena understood subtext as well as he did. She hesitated just long enough to seem uncertain. Just long enough to sell fear. "All right," she said. Rocco pushed himself upright, satisfied. He picked up his jacket and draped it over his arm. As he turned toward the door, Elena followed, her steps measured, her posture compliant. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a lesson being administered. Powerful man correcting a small mistake. What Rocco didn't see was the way Elena's hands relaxed at her sides. The way her breathing slowed. The way her focus sharpened inward, quiet and lethal. He believed humiliation was control. He believed fear was obedience. And for most people he was right. But Elena Rossi had learned long ago that humiliation was only dangerous if you accepted it. And she was done accepting anything. The corridor beyond the dining room was narrow and dim, designed less for comfort than for control. The lights were spaced far apart, leaving long stretches of shadow between them. Rocco walked ahead without looking back, already certain she would follow. Elena did. Each step echoed softly, measured, deliberate. She kept her gaze forward, her pace half a step behind his. Close enough to show compliance. Far enough to preserve space. She catalogued everything automatically. The exits she passed, the angles of the walls, the blind corners. Old habits surfaced uninvited, quiet and precise. Rocco stopped at the heavy door at the end of the hall. He didn't reach for it immediately. Instead he turned, studying her again with that same cool curiosity. "You don't ask many questions," he said. "I don't have the right to," Elena replied. Rocco smiled thinly. Smart answer. He pushed the door open. The room beyond was sparse. Concrete walls. A single table. 2 chairs, one pushed neatly under, the other angled away. No windows. No decoration. The kind of space that existed solely to remove choice. Rocco stepped inside and waited until she crossed the threshold before closing the door behind them. The sound of it shutting was final, deliberate. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the angled chair. Elena obeyed. She chose the edge of the seat, posture small, hands folded loosely in her lap. She could feel the tension coiling inside her. Not fear exactly, but something sharper. A warning. Rocco remained standing. "This is where people usually realize how serious things are," he said conversationally. "They apologize again. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they try to bargain." "I already apologized," Elena said. "Yes," Rocco replied. "You did. And you meant it." That surprised her. Just slightly. "But meaning it isn't the same as understanding it," he continued. "Understanding requires discomfort." He pulled out the second chair and sat across from her, leaning back, completely at ease. He crossed his ankle over his knee, as if they were discussing something mundane. "I could fire you," he said. "But that would be easy. Too easy. You'd walk out, disappear, and I'd never know what made you so composed." Elena kept her eyes lowered. "I'm not special." Rocco chuckled softly. "Everyone who says that is." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Here's the truth. You didn't disrespect me when you spilled the wine. You disrespected me when you didn't fall apart afterward." Elena said nothing. "That tells me one of 2 things," Rocco went on. "Either you're hiding something, or you don't understand who you're dealing with." He reached across the table suddenly and grabbed her wrist. This time Elena didn't stumble. Her muscles locked for a split second before she forced them to relax. Too late to be invisible. Too soon to be obvious. Rocco felt it. He tightened his grip, testing. "There it is," he said quietly. "That hesitation." Elena tried to pull back. Not forcefully. Not convincingly. Enough to suggest panic. Rocco stood, dragging her to her feet with him. "I don't like being lied to," he said. "I'm not lying," she said, her voice strained now, genuine tension bleeding through the mask. "Then you won't mind proving it." He pushed her backward, guiding her toward the far wall. There was no violence in it yet. Only pressure. Control. The kind that dared resistance. Elena's back met concrete. "Look at you," Rocco said softly. "Still standing straight. Still breathing slow. Do you know how many people I've watched break right here?" He leaned in close. "What are you?" The question wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was dangerous. Elena felt the line then. Clear and undeniable. The place where compliance turned into erasure. Where silence became consent to something worse. She met his eyes fully. "I work here," she said. Rocco's grip tightened. Wrong answer. He raised his free hand. Not to strike, but to test again. To provoke. To strip away the last layer of her disguise. Elena reacted. Not with a strike. Not with force. Just enough. She shifted her weight, twisted her wrist, and slipped free in a single smooth motion. Too smooth. Too efficient. She stepped away, heart pounding, breath sharp in her ears. The room went still. Rocco stared at his empty hand. Slowly he smiled. "There it is," he said. "You crossed the line." Elena realized then that the line hadn't been his. It had been hers. And she had just stepped over it. The air between them felt thinner after that. Rocco didn't move at first. He looked at his hand again, flexed his fingers once, as if checking that they still belonged to him. Then he straightened, smoothing the front of his jacket with deliberate care. "You're faster than you should be," he said calmly. Elena stood where she was, a careful distance away. Her pulse thundered, but her face betrayed nothing. She forced her shoulders to slump slightly, let a tremor creep into her hands. "I got lucky," she said. "You surprised me." Rocco's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in calculation. He took a step closer. Elena didn't retreat. She couldn't. Distance would look like awareness. Awareness would look like confidence. "You know," he said, "people lie with their mouths. Bodies tell the truth." He circled her again, slower this time, watching how she tracked him without seeming to. The faint adjustments in her stance. The way she kept him in her peripheral vision. "You're trying very hard to look afraid," he continued. "That's admirable. Most people don't even realize they're afraid until it's too late." Elena swallowed. "I don't want trouble." "I believe that," Rocco said. "What I don't believe is that trouble hasn't already found you." He stopped behind her. Close enough that she could feel his presence at her back, the subtle shift in the air when he leaned in. He didn't touch her. "That move," he said quietly. "The way you slipped free. It wasn't strength. It was timing." Elena's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before she caught herself. "I've waited tables my whole life. You learn to move around people." Rocco smiled faintly. "You learn to avoid them, not escape them." He stepped away and gestured to the door. "We're going downstairs." Elena's stomach dropped. "There's nothing down there," she said carefully. "I made a mistake. You proved your point." Rocco shook his head once. "No. I proved that I'm curious." He opened the door and waited. The stairwell beyond was colder, unfinished concrete descending into shadow. The kind of place designed to be forgotten by anyone who didn't need to remember it. Rocco started down without looking back. Elena followed. Each step felt heavier than the last. She kept her breathing uneven on purpose, letting anxiety color it. Inside, her mind raced, not with panic but with calculation. How much could she give without giving everything? How long could she maintain the lie? At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a wider room. Functional. No witnesses. Rocco stopped near the center and turned to face her. "This is where I find out who people really are," he said. "Pressure has a way of stripping things down." "I told you," Elena said, her voice thin. "I'm nobody." Rocco stepped forward abruptly, invading her space again. He didn't touch her this time. He didn't need to. "Then act like it," he said. He raised his hand again, not fast, not slow. A probing motion meant to provoke a reaction. Elena forced herself not to move. The urge to respond screamed through her muscles. To slip counter end it. She locked it down, every instinct screaming in protest. Her body shook under the restraint. Rocco's hand stopped inches from her face. He watched her closely. The sweat at her temples. The way her breath stuttered before settling again. "Most people flinch," he murmured. "You don't." "I'm scared," Elena whispered. "Of me?" he asked. She hesitated, just long enough to make it believable. "Yes." Rocco lowered his hand slowly. "You're scared of exposure," he said. "That's different." The word hit too close. Elena looked away, breaking eye contact at last. The movement cost her more than she expected. Felt like surrender and like survival at the same time. Rocco exhaled through his nose, a quiet sound. "You're choosing control over honesty," he said. "That's a dangerous habit." "It's the only one I have," Elena replied. For a moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar calm. "Very well," he said. "Keep your secrets. For now." He turned away, already dismissing her, or pretending to. Elena stayed where she was, heart racing, skin prickling with the effort of holding herself back. She had resisted revealing herself. But control, she knew, was never permanent. It only delayed the moment when something had to give. Rocco didn't let her go. Not really. He turned away as if the conversation were finished, took 2 unhurried steps toward the far wall, then stopped. The pause was deliberate. Test. Elena remained still behind him. Too still again. She forced a shallow breath, let her weight shift unevenly, but the damage was already done. The room had changed. The balance between them had shifted in a way she could feel in her bones. Rocco turned back slowly. "You know what gave you away?" he asked. Elena kept her eyes lowered. "I don't know what you mean." He studied her like a man rereading a page he'd skimmed too quickly the first time. "You never once asked me to stop." She frowned faintly, confused on purpose. "People who are weak," Rocco continued, "beg. Or they lash out. Or they freeze. You did none of those things." He took a step closer. Elena felt it immediately. The narrowing of space, the tightening of the invisible line between them. Her instincts urged her to adjust her stance, to square herself. She resisted, letting herself look uncertain instead. "You didn't panic when I touched you," he said. "You didn't rush the door. And when you slipped free..." He paused, eyes flicking to her hands. "You didn't celebrate it." Elena said nothing. Rocco nodded to himself. "That's restraint, not fear." He moved suddenly then. Fast enough to catch her off guard, slow enough to be intentional. His hand shot out, not to grab, but to cut across her space, forcing a reaction. Elena flinched. It was a good one. Convincing. Her shoulders rose, her breath caught. But her feet stayed planted. Balanced. Ready. Rocco saw it. His expression changed. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone else. But something hardened behind his eyes, sharpening his focus. "Again," he said quietly. Elena hesitated. Rocco moved a second time, closer now, the angle different. Real test. He watched her center of gravity, the way her hips adjusted a fraction before she could stop herself. That was all he needed. "There," he said softly. "That adjustment. You didn't think about it." Elena's pulse roared in her ears. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Words felt dangerous now. Rocco straightened slowly, a strange calm settling over him. "You're not weak," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "I never said I was strong," Elena replied. "No," Rocco agreed. "You didn't say anything." He stepped back, giving her space for the first time since they'd entered the room. The gesture wasn't kind. It was cautious. "I've spent my life around people who pretend," he said. "Men who dress like they have power. Men who borrow confidence and mistake it for strength." He looked at her again. You're not pretending. Elena's hands curled slowly at her sides. She forced them to relax. I serve tables, she said. That's all. Rocco smiled faintly. No, that's what you're doing. It's not what you are. The silence stretched. Rocco turned his head slightly, listening. Not to her, but to something distant. The hum of the building. The muffled life above them. Then he looked back at her. Decision settling into place. You know what happens when someone like you works for someone like me? He asked. Elena didn't answer. They get used, he continued. Or they get broken. Sometimes both. He took a breath, measured, controlled. The fact that neither has happened yet tells me something. Elena lifted her eyes despite herself. Rocco met her gaze fully now. Not looming. Not pressing. Sessing. You're disciplined, he said. You're trained. And you're hiding. The words landed with quiet finality. Elena felt the last pieces of her disguise strain under the weight of being seen. Not exposed, seen. It was worse. Rocco nodded once, as if confirming a private conclusion. The question isn't whether you're dangerous, he said. It's how long you can keep pretending you're not. He turned toward the stairs. Stay close, he added. Things are about to get complicated. As he walked away, Elena stood alone in the concrete room, her heart hammering, every instinct screaming that the ground beneath her had shifted irrevocably. Rocco Moretti had noticed. And once a man like him noticed something, he didn't forget it. The sound came from above first. Not a scream. Not shouting. Just a sharp, metallic crash. Wrong for a room that prided itself on quiet. Rocco froze at the base of the stairs, one hand lifting slightly, a signal that needed no explanation. Elena felt it immediately. A shift. The pressure spike in the air that had nothing to do with ego anymore. Then came the second sound. A dull thud, followed by hurried footsteps. Too fast. Too heavy. Not staff. Rocco's posture changed. The relaxed control drained away, replaced by something colder and more precise. He reached inside his jacket without looking at her. Stay here, he said. The words were automatic. Habit. Command. Elena didn't answer. Another crash echoed above them, louder this time. Something shattered. A voice shouted, cut off abruptly. The sound that followed was unmistakable, even muffled through concrete and distance. Violence had its own rhythm. Elena had learned it long ago. Rocco swore under his breath. They're early. He turned toward the stairs, already moving, when the lights flickered once. Twice, then steadied. Elena's chest tightened. Rocco, she said before she could stop herself. He paused, glancing back at her. That wasn't a robbery, she continued quietly. They're not here for money. Rocco studied her for half a second, then nodded once. He'd come to the same conclusion. A muffled gunshot cracked through the ceiling. The building seemed to flinch. Rocco drew his weapon smoothly, checking it with a glance. If you value your life, he said, you'll stay behind me. Elena watched him move toward the stairs, his focus narrowing to angles and timing. He was competent, trained enough to survive chaos. But survival and dominance were different skills. Before she could decide whether to follow, the stairwell door at the top burst open. Footsteps thundered down. Not panic. Coordinated. 3 silhouettes appeared against the dim light. Men dressed in dark clothing, faces obscured, movements sharp and purposeful. They didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. The first muzzle flash lit the stairwell. Rocco fired back instantly, dragging Elena sideways behind the concrete wall as bullets tore into the space where she'd been standing a second earlier. Dust exploded from the wall, stinging her skin. Stay down, Rocco shouted. Elena crouched, heart pounding, not with fear but with furious restraint. Every instinct screamed to move to close distance, to end it before it spread. She stayed still. Now. The attackers moved fast, spreading out, controlling angles. Professionals. This wasn't a message. It was an execution. One of them shouted something Elena couldn't hear clearly. Another advanced, weapon raised, scanning. Rocco leaned out and fired again, forcing them back for a moment. "We're not making it out this way," he muttered. A body hit the stairs above them. Someone from the restaurant. Dead or dying. Elena didn't look. That was the moment she knew. This wasn't about her disguise anymore. This wasn't about Rocco's pride or her past staying buried. Innocent people were in the building. Workers who had nothing to do with his world or hers. The line had moved. One of the attackers broke formation, rushing forward to flank. Rocco turned too late. Elena moved. She didn't think. Thinking was slower. She surged forward as the gunman rounded the corner, slapping the barrel of the weapon aside with one sharp motion. The shot went wide, deafening in the enclosed space. Elena closed the distance instantly, driving her shoulder into his chest and sending him crashing back into the wall. Rocco stared. The second attacker pivoted toward her. Elena seized the fallen man's arm, twisting, redirecting his momentum into the other. They collided hard. A weapon clattered across the floor. The third man raised his gun. Elena ducked, rolled, came up inside his reach. She struck once, precise, controlled, and he dropped, gasping, weapon useless. Silence crashed in behind the ringing in her ears. Rocco stood frozen, gun still raised, staring at the three men on the ground. Alive but incapacitated. Efficiently, deliberately. Elena straightened slowly, chest heaving, the reality of what she'd done settling in. She had crossed the final boundary. Footsteps echoed above them again, more this time. More voices. The threat wasn't over. Rocco lowered his weapon inch by inch, never taking his eyes off her. "You said you worked tables," he said hoarsely. Elena met his gaze, all pretense gone. "I tried." Another shout echoed down the stairwell. Rocco turned sharply toward the sound, then back to her. Decision flickered across his face. Fear, calculation, something like respect. "Looks like you're out of places to hide," he said. Elena nodded once, already shifting her stance, already preparing for what came next. Violence had entered the room. And it wasn't leaving quietly. The building didn't fall silent after the fight. It held its breath. Elena stood where she was, shoulders squared now, no effort made to soften herself. The mask she had worn so carefully lay in pieces at her feet, useless. Her breathing slowed as the surge faded, discipline reasserting itself. What remained was clarity. Rocco Moretti watched her as if seeing a new structure rise where a familiar one had stood moments before. More footsteps echoed above, retreating this time. Shouted orders, hurried movement. Whatever force had come for him hadn't expected resistance like this. They were pulling back, recalculating. Rocco exhaled slowly. He holstered his weapon without taking his eyes off Elena. "You could have run," he said. Elena nodded. "I know. Most people would have. I'm not most people," she replied. The words weren't defiant. They weren't proud. They were simply true. Rocco studied the men on the ground, then the stairwell, then her again. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. Not afraid, but displaced. Like a man realizing the rules he'd mastered no longer applied. "I thought I understood power," he said quietly. "I thought it came from control." Elena wiped dust from her hands. "It does. Just not the kind you're used to." He let out a short, humorless breath. "I tried to break you." "Yes," she said. "And you let me think I could." "Yes." Rocco nodded once, absorbing it. "That takes restraint." "So does stopping," Elena replied. Silence stretched between them. Heavy but no longer hostile. Up above, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Someone had called it in. Or several someones. The night was already unraveling beyond repair. Rocco straightened his jacket, then stopped. He looked down at the stain still ghosting his shirt. Slowly, deliberately. He unbuttoned it and shrugged it off, leaving it behind on a concrete ledge. Everything I built, he said, more to himself than to her, was designed to make people smaller. Elena met his gaze. That's why it failed. He considered that. Really considered it. I don't think you're here by accident, he said finally. People like you never are. No, Elena agreed. But I didn't come for you. Rocco smiled faintly. That might be the most unsettling part. Another set of footsteps approached. His people this time. Voices low, urgent. Rocco lifted a hand without turning. They stopped instantly. He looked back at Elena one last time. You won't be safe here anymore, he said. Not from them. Not from me. I know, she replied. He hesitated. Just a fraction. Then reached into his pocket and removed a keycard, placing it on the ledge beside the discarded shirt. There's a service exit 2 levels down, he said. Unmarked. Cameras disabled for the next 10 minutes. Elena glanced at the card, then back at him. Why? Rocco met her eyes, and for once, there was no calculation in his expression. Only acknowledgement. Because tonight, he said, I learned the difference between dominance and strength. Elena took the card. As she turned toward the stairwell, Rocco spoke again. Elena. He paused. You didn't just survive, he said. You changed the room. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She disappeared down the stairs without looking back, her steps sure, unhurried, free. Rocco remained where he was as his men gathered around him, voices rising, questions spilling out. He silenced them with a single look. The room felt different now. Smaller. Quieter. For the first time in decades, Rocco Moretti understood what it meant to be truly seen, and truly outmatched. And somewhere beyond the walls of his carefully controlled world, Elena Rossi walked back into the night not as a woman hiding from her past, but as one who no longer needed to.